like literally straight up through the window into the rain, and I remember it was because it was raining, and we went straight up and we did one of these and back onto the road. Now there's some few houses beside my house. We went right over the houses and down into the side street. And at that point, the small brown guy gave me a big hug, and he was up here for the duration. Now he was maybe 2.5 feet tall, really small guy. But the taller being, the female one, was extremely happy. Now I was extremely happy because I was out of my body and I was able to do that. So at the point I thought I was astral traveling. People have talked about astral traveling. I have no, like I don't know, have very like a lot of information about it, but I thought I'm astral traveling. So I said, I asked the being, I said, so I'm astral traveling, right? She's like, well, actually, you have the ability to create another physicality. And I was like, what? Like, I have the ability to create another body? And so I was like, okay. So at that point, she looks up in the sky, and behind me, there was like a red light in the sky, like kind of blinking. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, oh, that's another one that's having trouble on a bus. And I was like, okay. It didn't make sense to me. I was okay, but a smaller being was giving me a hug all the time. So the female being's like, you know, seeing that I was kind of very cuddling up to this little brown guy, and she's like, do you want to play with him? And I said, no, I have so many questions I'd like to ask you. So we started to take a walk. So while we were walking, it started raining harder, I remember, and I asked her what's going to happen to my body, like back in my room. Is if I'm awakened there, is it going to affect me here? And she's like, don't worry, we'll make sure that nobody comes into your room and bothers you. So I was like reassured, oh, okay, great, I can let this experience continue. So we started walking down the street, and I asked her how many questions? Probably about 2 or 3 questions. And I can't remember what those questions were. But as we progressed in the questions, she started to get happier and happier. And then all of a sudden, we were crossing a street. There's a street near my house. And this black like SUV pulls up from the side, like stops right beside me. And then I look at the female being beside me, and she looks at me, and then she looks at the truck and frowns. Now at that point I was like, I thought she was disappointed in me or something. That's, you know, disappointing that something was happening, and all of a sudden, wham! I'm back in my body. And like people, you hear of people waking up suddenly. This is like whack into my body. Like you get a sensation of smacking into your bed. And I wake up, I'm like, oh man. But it was so, I'm not going to say it's so real. It was absolutely real. It was physical real. And I remember looking down my skin to make sure it wasn't wet, because I thought it was, you know, raining outside. And that was like a crazy, crazy experience. Now that was the only physical experience I remember. All the other dreams, some of them have been memories from other lives that I have. Now I could say that they're my lives, but I don't know that because, as we spoke to you, there's something called imprinting, where you can imprint different memories on people before they come into our life. So whether they're my memories or not, I can't say. I just know that I have them. So another recent one is I remember one of my lives in Atlantis, and I can't remember how early on it was in Atlantis, because apparently there were 3 downfalls, and then the 3rd one was when the earth completely changed. But anyway, I remember I was a small little guy, if you could call me a henchman, but I was more like a henchman. I wasn't in one of my stereotypical leadership roles that I've been taking on. So I was a henchman working in some kind of laboratory, and there was this huge tank that we were walking up. There's about 3 or 4 other scientists, if you want to call them that, beside me, and they were placing this being into a tank. It was a rectangular prism tank. It was fairly large, but there was nothing in it. And the water was kind of like a greenish, like a really light greenish, and it was kind of glowing. And they threw this being in there, and then when it hit the water, it startled me because I've never seen anything like it. It was a mermaid. Now, yeah, exactly. What the heck? So she wasn't big. She was maybe like this big, like fairly small. She was like a child size. And sure enough, it was a tail bottom, and it was like a human upper. And she had arms as well. Now the arms were, I would say, proportional to the rest of her upper body, but the bottom was like a tail. And I remember looking in the tank, and because I was small, I could only get to maybe like the bottom of the tank. And I was looking at this being, and I was feeling extreme love for this being. I felt extremely upset that they were like encaging this being in a tank. And she looked at me, because everything was thought to thought again. So she looked at me, and all this emotion just came out of me, like towards her, and she swam to me, and she was like the most perfect face you could, female, because she was female, perfect female face you could possibly imagine. And then right as I saw her in the face, she was smiling, like slightly smiling. I said, you know, this is barbaric that they're doing this to you. And then she says, she pretty much had the attitude of, I know, but I'm going along with it. Like, you know, so, and then she smiled at me, and I said, how are you breathing in the water? Like, because normally you see cartoons, mermaids in the water, you can't see them breathe. They don't have any gills or anything. But right as I thought that, she turned to the side, and there were 3 gills on the side of her, like right here. This was slightly more raised from the neck, but there was 3 gills there, and they were flowing. I'm like, so you have both? She's like, yeah. So she had the lungs and the gills as well. And then all of a sudden I remember turning to the scientists and then giving them like a glaring look. And then it shifted. And then it shifted to another dream. I can't even remember what it was after that. There have been so many. But that one I was like, what the heck?
You've mentioned a few times to me about this feeling of extreme love, extreme happiness, I call it bliss. Now, these experiences that have been happening to you, is the point to bring you to that point of extreme happiness, or what is the meaning behind these experiences?
What it seems like to me is it's not a means to an end, it's simply a byproduct of. So my body has been undergoing many changes all the time through this shift in vibration that's happening, and I know I'm going along for the ride, and I've channeled different beings, and I've asked them, you know, am I going to be moving on to the new earth and all that? And
I'm going to stop you there, because you'll need to explain to the audience what you mean by the shift and moving on to the new earth.
Okay.
And yeah, fill in those things.
Sure. So planets as well as the universe and anything that is, so source energy, so and everything that is undergoing a constant evolution, so a progression, and that includes the earth and beings and animals, humans, plants, everything. So humans are undergoing an evolution constantly, and we've had different stages of different civilizations who've, you know, raised to their peak and then fell, and then raised to their peak and fell. It's an ongoing thing. It's the duality we've been talking about, the third density. But the earth is slowly raising its vibration. Now, you may have heard in historical times of different civilizations disappearing off the face of the earth randomly. The Mayans and other Indians around in that area, and people don't understand where they went. Well, apparently they were able to shift their vibration to a higher density and move up in terms of vibrational progression. So they moved to a higher dimension, if you want to call it that. So they did that en masse. So they got to a point, apparently, that they were so advanced that they could do this. And they were able to, because we talked about the nature of time, in the third density it exists such that we can use it as a reference point for progression, but in the higher densities it doesn't actually exist. So these minds were able, and other civilizations were able to see in the future, if you want to call it that, when something like this was going to happen again. And sure enough, they plotted the date as 2012, December 21st. And a lot of people have been talking about, you know, the end of the world and that movie. I haven't even seen that movie. I told you I'm a big movie buff, but I haven't seen that movie, mainly because I think it's ridiculous. You know, the world's going to end, meteor showers and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's going to happen one bit. 2012 is essentially a point at which these higher vibrations culminate to a point where a lot more people are able to shift, and as well as the earth. So the earth is going to shift en masse into a higher density.